Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine if a cardiologist could take a powerful, maybe somewhat risky new medication and test it on a highly accurate virtual replica of your heart. They could observe exactly how your specific electrocardiogram would react, literally before a single pill is ever administered to you. Sounds like sci-fi, right? Well, the stakes in cardiology are incredibly high, and today we're unpacking a fascinating new research paper that actually brings this kind of action-conditioned physiological simulation closer to reality. Let's dive in. So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by exploring the clinical imagination gap. Then, we'll introduce the ECG world model and really break down its architecture to see how it ticks under the hood. From there, we'll look at how it simulates clinical interventions, dig into the hard data and results, and finally wrap up with what this means for the future of cardiology. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the clinical imagination gap, and really why current AI just kind of hits a wall in this space. You know, the fundamental problem with today's medical AI really comes down to one thing: counterfactuals, basically asking, what if? Current foundation models are amazing at parsing past clinical data to generate static risk scores or classify diagnoses, but they fundamentally lack the ability to dynamically simulate the future. Think about it. If a doctor has to choose between giving a patient drug A or drug B, a static predictive AI can't project the unique physiological reaction of that specific patient's heart to either choice. It's perfectly optimized for observing what has happened, but it has absolutely zero imagination for actionable what-if scenarios. There's this crucial quote from the research that really hits the nail on the head. It points out that clinical treatment is inherently a partially observable Markov decision process. Now, that's a fancy way of describing a very real cycle. A doctor intervenes, the patient's biological state changes, we observe that new state on a monitor or a lab test, and then the cycle repeats. Because doing that kind of trial and error on a living, beating human heart is incredibly risky. Medical AI has to evolve. We have to move past just recognizing static patterns. We desperately need models that can simulate physiological reactions based on explicit medical actions. Which brings us to section 2, introducing the ECG world model. This is where we transition from static observation to full-blown simulation. To understand why this is a big deal, we have to look at the previous paradigm. Older generative medical AI was fragmented and what we call open loop. Sure, a standard generative model could spit out a picture of an ECG that looked pretty convincing, but without deep biological grounding, there was an unacceptably high risk of it hallucinating a heartbeat that's clinically impossible. On the flip side, predictive models only gave us static, non-actionable risk scores. The ECG world model completely flips the script by operating as a closed-loop, end-to-end system. It actively suggests treatments, simulates the resulting post-intervention ECGs, and evaluates them to give doctors actionable recommendations. It's literally acting like a highly advanced physics-informed flight simulator, but for cardiac dynamics. Okay, so section 3. Let's look under the hood and understand the architecture. How does this simulation actually work? The whole simulation runs on this highly structured 5-step pipeline. First, it extracts the patient's baseline cardiac state from an initial pre-dose ECG. Second, it applies a specific candidate pharmacological intervention. Basically, it introduces a virtual drug. Third, and this is the absolute game changer here, the model solves an ordinary differential equation, or ODE, to establish a physiological prior. This mathematically grounds the simulation in the actual physics of the heart. Fourth, it uses a latent diffusion model, heavily constrained by that exact ODE math to simulate the new post-intervention ECG. And finally, step 5, it runs a downstream risk evaluation on that newly generated heartbeat to make sure it's clinically safe. Let's talk about that diffusion process for a second. Generally, diffusion works by taking random, static, Gaussian noise and iteratively transforming it into a clean image or signal. The massive breakthrough with the ECG world model is the continuous injection of that ODE mathematical prior directly into the denoising process. By physically constraining the diffusion at literally every single step, the model's latent space is restricted. It's essentially forced to generate a heartbeat that strictly obeys the laws of biophysics. That totally slashes the risk of the AI hallucinating some morphologically impossible artifact that a doctor would just look at and throw in the trash. Moving right along to section 4. Simulating clinical interventions. Let's talk about the multimodal training data you need to pull this off. You see, to accurately predict these really complex outcomes, the model requires deep multimodal conditioning. It's not just looking at a squiggly line on an ECG in a vacuum. It integrates comprehensive demographic data like age and sex, along with vital clinical context. We're talking a patient's ejection fraction history, their active comorbidities, and their real-time lab results. And this makes perfect sense, right? A specific drug isn't going to alter every single human heart in the exact same way. How your heart reacts is highly dependent on your unique, baseline physiological environment. And the sheer scale of the data used to teach this model how to generalize is just incredible. The primary training cohort, sourced from the MIMIC IV dataset, includes nearly 17,500 unique patients and over 108,000 distinct patient drug episodes covering more than 3,000 different medications. Plus, to make sure the AI truly understood how specific chemicals alter electrical signals in the heart, the researchers layered in highly controlled drug response datasets targeting 8 specific drug regimens. It's this massive, dual-layered training approach that lets the model map out these incredibly complex patient-specific reactions. All right, let's get into the hard evidence. Section 5, Important Results and Outcomes. How does this specialized model stack up against the massive AI foundation models we hear about every day? The divergence is actually pretty wild. Even on single-step predictions, the ECG world model has a fraction of the error rate of generalized models like GPT-3.5 or GPT-5 Mini. But the real test is multi-step rollouts, meaning predicting sequential heartbeats further and further into the future. General AI models suffer from severe compounding errors. Think of it like a snowball effect. A tiny mistake on heartbeat number 1 snowballs, and suddenly the AI is predicting total physiological nonsense. But the ECG world model, because it is firmly anchored by those ODE math priors, stays perfectly stable across long horizons and completely avoids that compounding drift. The performance gap is even clearer when we look at the raw error metrics. For latent mean squared error, a state-of-the-art model like GPT-4o sits way up at 0.550. Meanwhile, the specialized ECG world model achieves a remarkably low 0.045. It's a huge difference. Even though models like GPT-4o have incredible reasoning capabilities for text and images, they natively struggle with the continuous, nonlinear dynamics of a beating heart. It just proves that if you want high-stakes medical simulation, you absolutely need a domain-specific, physics-informed architecture. Now, here is a feature that is absolutely crucial for real-world doctors. The model doesn't just output one single rigid prediction. By tapping into the inherent randomness or stochasticity of the diffusion process, it can run multiple distinct simulations for the exact same drug intervention. This generates a probabilistic curve. It gives clinicians an uncertainty-aware risk calibration. Because in cardiology, knowing the statistical variance of a risk, knowing the potential worst-case scenario, is just as important as knowing the expected outcome. It aligns the AI perfectly with how human experts actually think about patient safety. And we see this clinical precision play out in the vital metrics. When evaluating high-stakes waveform intervals that measure repolarization and conduction, things like the QTC and PR intervals, standard language models fail completely. They have incredibly low accuracy because they miss the micromechanics of the heart. The ECG world model, on the other hand, consistently achieves high accuracy across these vital intervals. It successfully reconstructs the exact nuanced waveform shapes that indicate severe, drug-induced risks, like life-threatening arrhythmias. Its utility goes way beyond just drawing a pretty graph. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the future of cardiology and building a robust foundation for safe AI in medicine. To really summarize the core breakthroughs we've talked about today, we now have a physiology-informed world model that actually respects the biophysical constraints of the human body. We have a closed-loop system capable of actionable counterfactual simulation, that critical what-if planning, and we have uncertainty-aware risk calibration that thinks the way human doctors do. Taken together, this is a massive leap forward, establishing an incredibly robust foundation for safe, predictive AI in cardiovascular care. So, I'll leave you with this provocative thought. If AI can now safely simulate the counterfactual future of a single heartbeat, responding dynamically to a specific drug before the patient ever swallows a pill, how else are these world models going to revolutionize personalized medicine? Are we looking at a rapidly approaching future where every critical treatment for every single organ in our bodies is tested out on a dynamic digital twin first? It's pretty amazing to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.